The great betrayal Captain Jake Morrison stood at the helm of the Defiance, watching the stars streak past as the ship sailed through the vast emptiness of space. His mind, however, was far from the serenity of the stars. Earth had been abandoned, cast aside, by the very beings it once called allies. The Galactic Council, the governing body of the galaxy, had turned its back on humanity. They had left Earth unprotected, vulnerable to the enemies that roamed the stars. He clenched his jaw, eyes narrowing. The comms officer spoke up, breaking the silence. "Captain, we've received the transmission." Jake didn't need to ask who it was from. He already knew. The voice of the Galactic Council was unmistakable. They had promised support in the past, but now they were silent, leaving Earth alone in the face of impending destruction. On the screen before him, the cold, indifferent face of the Council's representative appeared. He was an alien tall, with translucent skin and eyes that gleamed with an eerie glow. His voice was as detached as always, carrying no trace of emotion, no remorse. "Captain Morrison," the alien began, "we regret to inform you that the Galactic Council has voted to cease all support for Earth. The risks of continued alliance outweigh the benefits. Your planet is now considered an isolated entity. We will not provide further assistance." Jake felt his heart drop. He had known it was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made the betrayal all the more real. The words echoed in his ears. "Isolated entity," Jake muttered under his breath. "So we're on our own now." The alien continued, his tone clinical. "We advise you to surrender the leadership of your forces to the Zvak Empire. Resistance is futile." The Zvak Empire. A force of destruction that had swept across the galaxy like a wildfire, conquering planets and leaving nothing but ashes behind. Now, Earth was being asked to bow down to them. Jake's fists clenched tightly. He wasn't going to let that happen. Not on his watch. The transmission ended with the flick of a switch. The screen went black, leaving Jake alone in the command center, facing the harsh reality of their situation. He looked out into the starry expanse beyond, his mind racing. The Galactic Council had been Earth's greatest ally, and now, in their time of need, they had turned their backs on them. But Jake refused to believe that Earth was finished. There had to be a way forward. There had to be a way to fight back. "Captain?" A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Lieutenant Lisa Carter, his trusted second in command. "What are your orders?" Jake turned to face her. She was standing at the edge of the control room, waiting for him to give direction. She, too, must have been thinking about the implications of the Council's decision. "We fight," Jake said, his voice steady, though his mind was filled with doubt. "We don't surrender. Not now, not ever." Lisa nodded, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "The Council's decision. This changes everything. We're facing an enemy far greater than we've ever fought before." Jake met her gaze. "I'm sure. They may have abandoned us, but that doesn't mean we're weak. We're Earth. We've been through worse. And we're still standing." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the words settling in. They were alone now. The galaxy had given up on them. But that meant nothing to Jake. He had spent his life protecting Earth, and he wasn't going to stop now. No one was going to tell him when the fight was over. "We'll need to call for help. Other species, those who aren't under the Council's rule. We might not be able to rely on the Council, but there are others out there who know what the Zvak will do to them too." Lisa turned toward the communications officer. "Send out the call. We need to reach every faction that has ever stood against the Council." Jake walked to the map at the center of the room, his eyes scanning the positions of enemy fleets across the galaxy. The Zvak Empire was already moving toward Earth. The first wave of their invasion would arrive within weeks. But Jake wasn't planning on sitting idly by, waiting to be crushed. Earth had fought harder than anyone knew, and now it was time to fight for their survival. "Prepare the fleet," Jake ordered. "We'll need to strike fast, hit them. Before they're fully set up, I want every ship on alert. This war has just begun." He turned to face Lisa again, his expression grim. "It's time we showed the galaxy that humanity is not just a weak, abandoned species. We're a force to be reckoned with." Lisa nodded again, determination in her eyes. She knew what was at stake. The future of Earth, the future of humanity, rested on their shoulders now. The Council was gone, the alliances had crumbled, and the Zivak were coming. But if there was one thing Jake knew, it was that humanity wasn't going down without a fight. As the crew began to prepare the fleet, Jake found himself thinking back to the days when Earth was part of the Galactic Council. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but now they had nothing to rely on but each other. It was time for Earth to stand on its own. No more waiting for others to save them. The galaxy had given up on them. But humanity? Humanity wasn't finished. Yet, they were just getting started. Jake stepped away from the command center's control panel, walking toward the ship's observation deck. He looked out at the stars once more, his resolve hardening. "We're going to show them what humanity is capable of," he whispered to himself. And with that, the war for Earth's survival truly began. The last weapon, the Defiance, moved silently. Through the void, the quiet hum of its engines the only sound in the otherwise still command center. The crew was on high alert, every eye focused on their tasks. But even in the face of looming doom, a flicker of hope had ignited in Captain Jake Morrison's heart. They had a plan. It wasn't much, but it was their last chance. An ancient weapon hidden beneath Earth's surface, left behind from a time when humanity was prepared for a much larger conflict. Jake paced in front of the large display showing the coordinates, his mind working through the possibilities. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He had lost so much already, and now the galaxy was telling them that they didn't even deserve to exist. But Earth wasn't just going to roll over and die. Not on his watch. "We've made it this far," Jake muttered under his breath as he turned to face Lieutenant Lisa Carter. She stood by the map, tapping through the data with sharp, quick movements. The weapon was buried deep within the Earth, hidden away by the last generation of human soldiers before they entered the Galactic Council. Jake had heard rumors about it, whispered stories of a weapon so powerful it could defeat an entire fleet. Now he had to trust those rumors. "Everything's prepped," Lisa said, looking up from the console. "We're heading to the site as we speak. Should take us a couple of hours to reach the coordinates." Jake nodded, his gaze hardening. "Good. The Zivak will be here within days, and we're still short on time. If this weapon works, it'll give us a fighting chance. If not..." His voice trailed off, but Lisa didn't need to hear the rest. "If it works, we have a chance to turn the tide," she finished for him. Her tone as firm as his dot. Jake turned his attention back to the comms officer. "Let's make sure we're not walking into a trap. If we even suspect the Zivak are anywhere nearby, we'll pull back." The officer gave a quick nod. "Understood, Captain." The ship's engines hummed as they entered Earth's atmosphere, the ship's sleek form cutting through the sky with an unsettling silence. Earth's once proud cities, now dark and abandoned, passed beneath them like ghostly remnants of a former age. The once thriving homeworld had become a barren battlefield, its people scattered across the stars, leaving only those who refused to surrender to protect the planet Dot. As they neared the site, Jake's mind raced with questions. What kind of weapon had the last generation of humans left behind? And more importantly, could it truly be used? The Zvak weren't just an invading force. They were an extinction-level threat. Their fleet, equipped with unimaginable technology, would crush Earth within days if given the chance. But if the weapon could give Earth the edge, if it could turn the tide of battle, he didn't want to think about what would happen if it didn't. "Captain, we're nearing the location," came the voice of the pilot over the intercom. "We'll be in position to deploy in 5 minutes." Jake nodded and turned to face his crew. This was it. There would be no turning back. Earth had been abandoned by the galaxy, and they were on their own. This weapon, whatever it was, their last hope. "All right, people," Jake said, his voice steady, but with a hint of urgency. "Get ready. We're about to find out if humanity has a fighting chance. Stay sharp. We'll deploy teams as soon as we touch down." As the Defiance neared the landing zone, Jake's mind flashed back to the events that had led them to this point. The Galactic Council's betrayal. The cold words of their emissary, telling them that humanity had outlived its usefulness. The Zivik threat, their insidious expansion throughout the galaxy. The galaxy had chosen its side, and it wasn't with Earth. It was up to them to change that. The ship touched down gently in the desolate landscape. The area surrounding them was an ancient military base, long forgotten and hidden beneath the Earth's surface. The weapon, according to the records they had unearthed, was buried in a vault deep underground. The journey to the vault would take them through the ruins of a place that had once been a center of human power, now a shadow of its former self. Jake and his team moved swiftly, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence of the abandoned facility. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of age and decay filled the corridors. Jake's heart pounded with every step. They were about to face whatever weapon humanity had left behind. He couldn't afford to waste any time. They arrived at the vault door, a massive piece of reinforced metal covered in strange symbols and markings. It was clear the weapon wasn't just something any person could access. This had been designed to be locked away for a reason. "Captain, the vault's locked," Lisa said, running her fingers over the control panel. "There's a code needed to open it, something I've never seen before." Jake stared at the door. If they couldn't open it, all their efforts would be in vain. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the symbols. "What is it?" Lisa asked, sensing his change in demeanor. Jake's fingers grazed the symbols, and his eyes lit up with understanding. "It's not just a code. It's a sequence. The humans who hid this weapon wanted only the right person to find it." He pressed a series of buttons on the console, and the door began to hum, slowly unlocking. The door slid open with a heavy, mechanical sound, revealing the weapon inside. It was a massive, alien-looking device, an enormous cannon, glowing with strange, vibrant energy. The power radiating from it was undeniable. Jake had no idea how it worked, but there was no time for doubt. It was their best shot. He turned to Lisa. "We don't have much time. Get this weapon online. We have to use it before the Zvak get any closer." As the crew began to work quickly, Jake stood at the threshold, watching the distant horizon. They were out of time. The Zvak would be here soon. If this weapon didn't work, well, Earth's fate would be sealed. The galaxy had abandoned them. But humanity wasn't ready to give up just yet. Jake gritted his teeth, looking at the weapon, with renewed hope. This was the last stand. It had to work. The alliance of survivors. The hum of the Defiance's engines echoed through the barren land, but Jake Morrison's thoughts were far from the humdrum of the ship's operations. The weapon was ready activated, its massive form, glowing faintly with otherworldly energy, but Jake knew that Earth's victory could not depend on a single piece of technology. The Zivik Empire's fleet was large, too large for humanity to take on alone. They needed help. They needed allies. The Galactic Council had turned its back on humanity, but there were still other factions in the galaxy groups that had been oppressed by the Council, other races that understood the Ziak threat. Jake's mind focused on those potential allies. Now it was time to reach out to them. They had one shot, and if the right people stood with Earth, they could make a stand. But first, they had to convince them to trust humanity. Jake paced back. And forth in the command center, as Lieutenant Lisa Carter worked at the communication console. The glowing lights of the interface flickered as Lisa sent encrypted messages to the known factions that had once been in opposition to the Council. It was a long shot. Some of these species had been isolated, afraid of crossing the Galactic Council's boundaries. Many had no reason to believe Earth could be anything but a lost cause now. "They're not answering," Lisa said, frustration creeping into her voice. "We've sent out dozens of messages, and so far, not a single one has been acknowledged." Jake paused, taking in the scene. The room was tense, and the crew's hopes were slowly crumbling under the weight of silence. But Jake had always believed in the strength of humanity. They had survived countless obstacles in their history, and this would not be the moment they gave up. "Send one more message," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. "But this time, don't ask for help. Tell them what's coming. Tell them we're not going to lie down and let this vac wipe us out. If we're going to stand together, we need to speak the truth." Lisa gave him a quick nod and turned back. To the console, rewording the message. "We're not just asking for your help," the message began. "The Zac are coming. The Galactic Council has abandoned us, and Earth stands alone against an enemy unlike any we've faced. But we won't give up. We're fighting, and we need others who are willing to fight beside us. If you're out there, if you've been oppressed or abandoned, you're not alone. We will stand together." Jake stared at the screen, waiting for the response. His mind wandered to the species he was hoping to contact, the Kalori, a nomadic warrior race with the strength to fight the Zivak. The Usolians, a peaceful race with extraordinary telepathic abilities, but no real military might. And the Sarniks, a species of exiled mercenaries with vast combat experience. If they could all come together, humanity might just have a fighting chance. Minutes passed. The silence was suffocating, and the weight of the situation threatened to pull the breath from Jake's chest. Had he miscalculated? Had he relied too much on hope? Then the console pinged. A message had come through. It was encrypted, but the symbols were familiar. The Kalori. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He quickly ordered Lisa to decrypt it, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Earth," the message began. "You are not alone. We have watched your struggle, and though we have feared the Council's wrath, we will not stand by while the Zivech threaten your world. Our warriors will stand with you. We have always respected humanity's fight. We are coming." Jake's breath caught in his throat. The Kalori were sending reinforcements. They were standing with Earth. Lisa's voice broke through his momentary shock. "There's more." She pulled up another message, this time from the Usolians. Their response was short, but no less impactful. "Your war is our war. We will stand with you, humanity." Jake felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. This was just the beginning. The Sarniks hadn't responded yet. Their mercenary mindset was unpredictable. Would they honor their word, or would they choose to sit this one out? He didn't know, but he couldn't wait. He had to move forward with what they had. He turned to the crew, his expression determined. "This is it. The Kalori and the Usolians are with us. We fight for Earth's future, and we fight for the freedom of the galaxy. But we need more." He looked over at Lisa. "Prepare the fleet. We move forward with what we have. If the Sarniks answer, we'll be ready. If not, we still fight." The tension in the room shifted, the weight of uncertainty replaced by a spark of hope. Humanity was no longer fighting alone. It had all eyes, and these all eyes would not let them face the Zivak Empire without a fight. The odds were still stacked against them, but Jake could feel a shift in the atmosphere. Earth was no longer just an outcast. It was a leader, a symbol of defiance in the galaxy. The crew began to make preparations, readying the fleet for the coming war. The Kalari ships would arrive within hours, and the Yosolians would be ready to link their telepathic power to Earth's communication systems. Together, they would form an alliance that no one had expected, and no one could stop. Jake stood by the viewport, watching the stars streak by as the ship moved closer to its destination. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, Jake felt that humanity had a fighting chance. The galaxy had given up on them. But now, with their new allies, humanity would show them all what they were capable of. The war was about to begin, and Earth wasn't going down without a fight. Jake's voice was steady as he turned back to the crew. "We'll show them what happens when you underestimate humanity." The Defiance moved forward into the unknown, carrying not just the hopes of Earth, but the hopes of a galaxy that had lost its way. The coming storm, the silence of space, felt heavier as the fleet gathered in orbit around Earth. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, staring at the view ahead, an empty expanse of stars. Yet the weight of what lay ahead hung thick in the air. The Kalori warships had arrived, their sleek forms cutting through the darkness like blades, but their numbers were small. The Yosolians, with their advanced telepathic abilities, were there too, but their power lay more in their minds than their weapons. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were still outmatched, even with the reinforcements. Earth had been abandoned by the galaxy, but now they were forming something new, an alliance of survivors. However, that meant nothing if they couldn't hold their ground against the coming Zvek fleet. "Captain," Lieutenant Lisa Carter's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "We've just received an update. The Zivi are on their way. They'll be in range in 2 hours." Jake clenched his fists. "How many ships are we facing?" "Hundreds," Lisa answered grimly. "Their full invasion fleet. The reports show their ships are heavily armed, and they have a much larger force than we do." Jake swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. The odds were overwhelming, but this wasn't the time for doubt. They had allies, now real allies, people who had fought and bled for their freedom. This was the first real chance Earth had had in weeks. They weren't going to let it slip away, not without a fight. "Signal the fleet. Tell them to be ready," Jake ordered, his voice steady but filled with a growing sense of urgency. "We have 2 hours to prepare. That's not a lot of time. Make every second count." He turned to face the large map projected on the wall, showing the position of Earth's fleet and the incoming Zvek ships. A small glimmer of hope flashed in his chest. The Kalori were powerful warriors, and their ships were some of the most advanced in the galaxy. They weren't just here to help, they were here to fight. The Yosolians, while not a military force, would give them a crucial advantage. Their telepathic abilities would allow them to coordinate attacks and intercept enemy communications. They had something the Zvek didn't: unity, a shared purpose. "Have we heard anything from the Sarniks?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Lisa shook her head. "No word from them, Captain. We can't count on them." Jake exhaled, knowing that if the Sarniks didn't join them, they would have to make do with what they had. The time for waiting was over. Then we fight with what we've got, and we make sure Earth's voice is heard across the galaxy. The Defiance shook slightly as the ship's engines fired up, and the surrounding fleet followed suit. Humanity wasn't just going to lie down. They were going to show the galaxy that they had something to fight for. As the fleet prepared to engage, Jake's mind went to the weapon they had discovered, an ancient force of unimaginable power. They had no idea how it worked, but it was their last shot, their only shot. If the weapon could be used properly, it would give them the edge they desperately needed. The Zvek wouldn't know what hit them. Jake moved to the command console, his eyes scanning the screens. Lieutenant Carter, coordinate with the Kalori. We'll need their ships to hit the Zivek's flanks. The Usolians get their telepaths. Working with our comms, we need to know everything. Lisa nodded, her fingers already flying over the console. Understood, Captain. I'll have the fleet in position in 5 minutes. Jake looked out at the stars again. 2 hours. 2 hours until the Zivek arrived. Captain, the weapon's ready. A voice from the engineering deck broke through the tense silence. But we don't know the full extent of its power. The test was unstable. Jake's heart sank. He knew the weapon was their last chance, but this uncertainty was a blow they couldn't afford. Still, there was no turning back now. I'll take full responsibility for the risk, Jake said, his voice unwavering. We have no other choice. Prepare to activate it on my command. As the fleet assembled, Jake's mind turned to the future. Humanity had faced countless threats before, but nothing like this. The Zivak were an unstoppable force. So far, no one had been able to stop them. And now, Earth had to take a stand. He took a deep breath, willing himself to focus. The Zivak. Fleet was on the way, and the galaxy's eyes were on them. If they failed, Earth would fall, and the galaxy would never hear from them again. Ready the fleet for battle, Jake said, his voice cold but determined. This is humanity's. Stand. We fight for the future. The ships moved into position, and the tension in the command center grew thick. The Zivek were on the horizon. The hour of reckoning was near, but Jake had no intention of going down without a fight. Not today. The countdown had begun. And Earth was ready. The battle begins. The black void of space was alive with the hum of the hum. Defiance's engines as it led the human fleet into battle. Earth's ships, though outnumbered, were lined up in formation, ready for the storm ahead. The Kalori. Warriors' sleek ships formed the left flank, their advanced weaponry waiting for the command to strike. The Usolians' ships, though not built for combat, hovered behind, their telepathic network already linked to Earth's communication system, primed to provide crucial intel. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the helm, staring at the vast display. In front of him, the Zivek fleet was already coming into view, dark, massive ships gliding toward Earth like predators. The battle was about to begin. Captain, we've made contact with the Zivek command ship, Lisa Carter reported, her voice steady but tense. They're not responding to our communications. They're preparing to engage. Jake's jaw tightened. I wasn't expecting them to talk. He glanced over his shoulder at the crew. Get ready. This is it. Everything we've fought for comes down to this. On the screen, the enemy fleet loomed closer, an imposing wall of alien warships. The Zivak ships were designed for overwhelming force, large, heavily armored, and bristling with weapons capable of destroying entire planets. Their power was unmatched, and Jake knew that this battle was going to push every single human and ally to their limits. The odds were impossible, but they had no choice but to fight. Captain, came the voice of Lieutenant Carter, we've got incoming Zivak fighters. They're breaking formation and heading straight for us. Jake's eyes narrowed. Send the Kalori ahead. We need to keep their fighters off our backs while we prepare to fire. The Shalori ships, agile and deadly, shot forward, at breakneck speed, moving to intercept the Zivak fighters. The battle had begun in earnest. The Defiance's guns came online, and Jake braced himself, his hands steady on the console. Humanity stands today, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The first volley of fire from the Zivak fleet lit up the darkness of space. Laser beams and missile barrages rained down toward the human fleet. The Defiance shuddered as shields flared to life, absorbing the impact, but the enemy's firepower was far stronger than expected. For a moment, Jake felt the weight of the reality they were facing. These enemies were relentless. They would not stop until Earth was wiped from the galaxy. "Shields holding," Lisa reported, her voice edged with urgency. "But we're taking heavy damage from these Vex fire. We need to get that weapon online now." "Activate the weapon," Jake ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. "It's time to show them what we're made of." The ancient weapon they had uncovered, Earth's last hope, was humanity's secret weapon. It had been buried beneath the surface for centuries, its design unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Jake didn't know how it worked, but he knew one thing. If they didn't use it, the Zivek would have no trouble overwhelming them. The weapon came online with a low hum, its power beginning to pulse in the core of the Defiance. The lights flickered. For a moment, the entire ship drawing power from its reserves. On the display, a massive beam began to charge, bright energy gathering in the weapon's chamber. "We're ready, Captain," came the voice of the chief engineer, his hands flying across the controls. "Fire at will. Target the Zviak." "Flagship," Jake commanded. "Let's see what this thing can do." The massive cannon at the ship's heart fired, and a blinding beam of energy shot out toward the enemy flagship. It cut through the void like a knife, colliding with the Zvak flagship's shields. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with an explosion that rocked the very fabric of space, the Zivek shields cracked. The beam continued forward, piercing through the ship's defenses and slamming into its core. The Zivek flagship erupted in a burst of light, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The entire human fleet watched in stunned silence as the massive vessel crumbled in space, torn apart by the force of Earth's weapon. The shockwave reverberated through the surrounding ships, sending Zvak fighters scattering. But there was no time to celebrate. The Zivek, though stunned, were not done. They quickly regrouped, launching a second wave of fighters. They would not be deterred so easily. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice strained, "the Zvak fleet is regrouping. They're preparing for another wave. The weapon did damage, but it's not enough to turn the tide yet." Jake's eyes were steely. They had only one shot at winning this. "We hold the line. Give everything we have." The fleet moved into a defensive position, the Kalori warships engaging the Zivek fighters head-on, taking heavy fire but staying resilient. The Uzulians used their telepathic powers to disrupt Zvak communications, confusing their forces. Earth ships, though outnumbered, fought with everything they had, each strike a declaration of humanity's will to survive. "Enemy ships closing in," Lisa warned. "They're preparing for another full assault." Jake felt the pressure mounting, but he wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. "We've come too far. We won't back down. We fight for Earth." The battle raged on. Each passing second felt like a lifetime, but there was no turning back. Humanity had no choice but to fight. The Zigas firepower was overwhelming, but they were learning. They were adapting. And with every pulse of the ancient weapon, they were showing the galaxy that humanity wasn't about to roll over. The battle was far from over, but humanity had given its first blow. And the Zvak would soon realize that Earth would not fall without a fight. The storm was just beginning, but humanity was ready. The turning point, the battle, was chaos. Space had become a sprawling war zone, with the once clear expanse now filled with debris, flashes of light, and the unmistakable sound of weapons discharging across the void. The Defiance and the Allied. Ships fought valiantly, but the overwhelming power of the Zvak fleet seemed almost insurmountable. Despite their initial success with the ancient weapon, the tide of battle had begun to shift. The Zivak were adapting, pushing back with renewed aggression. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the command console, eyes fixed on the chaotic screen in front of him. The Zvak's second wave of fighters had come in faster, and more coordinated than the first. They were relentless, and each strike felt like a hammer pounding at humanity's resolve. The Kalori ships were holding their own, but there were too many enemy fighters. Even with the Aeolians' telepathic disruption, the Zvak seemed to find their rhythm, pushing humanity's forces to the edge. "Captain, the Defiance is taking fire." Lieutenant Carter's voice crackled through the comm. "Our shields are holding, but we can't keep this up for long." Jake's gaze flickered to the damage reports. His heart sank. The Zivek had focused their fire on the Defiance, their largest target, and though their shields were holding for now, the strain was starting to show. The ship was starting to groan under the weight of the sustained barrage. "Redirect all power to the shields." Jake barked, slamming his fist onto the console. "We can't afford to lose the Defiance." He turned back to the screen, scanning the movements of the enemy fleet. The Zivek were clever. They were using their overwhelming numbers to split the human forces, isolating pockets of resistance. But the humans still had one advantage: their ability to adapt and think quickly in the face of disaster. The weapon, the one thing humanity had relied on, was still operational, but Jake knew it wouldn't be enough. The Zvak were too organized, their tactics too advanced. Even with the Kalori at their side, it wasn't enough. "Captain, we've got a new problem," Lisa said, her voice tight with urgency. "The Sarniks, they've arrived." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The Sarniks mercenaries. He had hoped for their aid, but had not expected them to show up now. The mercenary race was known for being unpredictable, often motivated by self-interest. Would they be a help, or would they turn the tide of the battle for their own gain? "Bring them into the fold. Get them in formation with the Kalori," Jake ordered. "We need every ship we can get." The Sarniks' fleet appeared in the distance, their ships bristling with weapons violent, merciless, and designed for one thing: destruction. They immediately engaged the Zvak fighters, their ruthless combat techniques tearing into the enemy ranks. For a moment, it felt like Earth had an edge. But Jake knew this wasn't the solution. This was a fight that required more than just firepower. It required a decisive move that would shake the Zivek to their core. "Captain, the weapon is ready to fire again," the chief engineer reported, his voice full of hesitation. "But there's no guarantee it'll work this time. The damage from the previous shot has compromised its systems. We may not get another chance." Jake turned back to the weapons control panel. He was running out of options. The Zivek were regrouping, preparing for a full assault. Earth's forces were on the verge of collapse. If the weapon could turn the tide, this would be their final chance. But there was a risk. The weapon might fail, and without it, they were nothing more than sitting ducks. "Fire the weapon," Jake commanded, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "We don't stop fighting. We end this now." The engineer hesitated for a moment, but then, with a deep breath, he pressed the button. The weapon hummed to life, its power building rapidly as energy surged through the ship's systems. A massive beam of energy shot out toward the Zvek fleet, splitting space itself as it carved through the void. This time, the weapon wasn't just a show of strength. It was desperation. Earth's last, best shot. The beam collided with the heart of this Zvak fleet, and for a moment, the universe held its breath. The explosion that followed was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. The Zivek flagship shattered under the force, its hull disintegrating. In a flash of brilliant light, the shock wave rippled out, taking down dozens of Zivek ships in its wake. The remaining Zvak forces, shaken by the sheer force of the attack, scattered, retreating into the blackness of space. Jake watched, wide-eyed, as the screen showed the Zvak fleet beginning to disintegrate, but there was no time for celebration. The battle was far from over. The Zivak still had reinforcements on the way, and they wouldn't give up easily. But for the first time since the invasion began, Earth's fleet had delivered a blow that the enemy hadn't expected. Status. Report, Jake said, his voice commanding but calm. The Zivak flagship is gone, Lisa responded, her voice filled with disbelief. They're retreating, Captain. The remaining ships are disorganized. We may have just won this battle. Jake stared at the screen, watching the remaining Zivak ships fall back, their once proud fleet now in disarray. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, but he knew it wasn't over. The Zivak would return, and when they did, Earth would be ready. We've got them on the run, Jake said, turning to the crew, his voice filled with resolve. But we're not finished. Not yet. The crew nodded, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Humanity had proven its strength, but the true test lay ahead. Let's prepare for the next phase, Jake continued, his gaze fixed on the stars. We've just shown the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated. Now, let's finish this. As the fleet regrouped and began to push forward, Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of the war on his shoulders. Earth had made its stand, but the coming storm, the full wrath of this Zivak Empire, was still on its way, and they had to be ready. Humanity had fired the first shot, and the galaxy would never forget it. Ask ChatGPT. Humanity's last stand, the quiet hum of the Defiance's engines was the only sound that filled the command center, but the silence was anything but peaceful. Despite the success of the previous battle, Jake Morrison couldn't shake the weight, pressing down on him. The Zivak had retreated, yes, but only for now. They would regroup, return with more ships, more firepower, and they wouldn't stop until Earth was wiped from existence. Jake stood at the command console, staring out at the stars. They had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. Every decision he made now could mean the difference between Earth's survival and total annihilation. He had promised his crew they wouldn't go down without a fight. But deep down, he knew that humanity was facing its greatest test. Captain, we've received word from the Kalori, Lieutenant Lisa Carter called out, pulling Jake from his thoughts. Their fleet is ready to continue supporting us, but they're warning that the Zivak will likely return in full force. They'll need reinforcements before then. Jake nodded grimly. We need to strike fast then. We can't afford to wait for them to regroup. Prepare the fleet and make sure our allies are ready. Already on it, Captain, Lisa replied, her voice steady. The Kalori were fierce warriors, but even they couldn't stand alone against the might of the Zivak. They needed more ships, more soldiers, more firepower. But Earth was running out of time. Captain, another voice broke through the tense silence. It was the chief engineer, his face lined with exhaustion. We've analyzed the weapon's output, and it's unstable. We can't fire it again without causing a meltdown. The power it's drawing is unsustainable. Jake turned sharply, his mind racing. They had relied on that weapon to buy them time, but it wasn't a long-term solution. Are you saying we can't use it again? I'm afraid so, the engineer said, his voice grim. At least not without completely draining our power systems. If we push it any further, we'll risk losing everything. Jake clenched his fists. They were down to their last option. The weapon had been their ace, their secret weapon, but now it was off the table. They had no choice but to rely on what they had left. No more weapons, Jake said, turning to face his crew. We fight the old-fashioned way. We use our brains, our will, and our alliances. And we show this Zivak that we're not going to stop. Not now, not ever. Lisa's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the weight of their reality hung heavy in the air. The Zivak are coming for Earth, she said, her voice unwavering. "We'll fight them, Captain. Together." Jake looked at the crew around him. Every person on this ship had put their trust in him. They had all sacrificed too much. Earth wasn't just their home. It was the symbol of humanity's strength, the beacon that the galaxy had forgotten. But humanity wouldn't be erased. They had a long history of fighting against impossible odds. This time would be no different. "The Kalori will strike their flanks," Jake said, turning back to the map on the screen. "We'll use the Yosolians to coordinate their telepathic abilities with our comms. We need perfect synchronization." "Captain," a voice called from the communications officer, "we're getting a distress signal." "It's from the Sarnics." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The Sarnics had been mercenaries reliable when it suited them, but they had never been Earth's allies. He had no idea what to expect from them. "Put it through," Jake said, bracing himself for whatever came next. The screen flickered, and a face appeared, an alien with green scales and sharp eyes. The Sarnics representative's voice was gruff and filled with a sense of urgency. "Earth," he said, his voice low. "We've watched you fight. You've earned our respect. We'll join your fight. For the right price." Jake didn't hesitate. "We'll give you everything we can, but we need your support now. The Sivak are coming for us. For all of us." The Sarnics representative didn't hesitate either. "Then we'll fight with you, Captain. Consider it a debt paid." Jake's eyes narrowed, but he didn't have time to question their motives. The Sarnics were now officially part of the Alliance. The fight for Earth had expanded, and their numbers were growing. With every new ally, humanity had a better chance at survival. "Deploy the Sarnics ships immediately," Jake ordered. "We'll launch our final offensive in 20 minutes. Let's end this." The crew moved into action, each person knowing their role. The ship hummed with energy as preparations for the final battle began. The galaxy had given up on humanity, but Earth wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. 2 hours later, the enemy fleet arrived. Jake's hands were steady on the console as the first wave of Zvak ships appeared on the edge of Earth's atmosphere. Their numbers were even greater than anticipated, their ships vast and looming. But Jake didn't flinch. He had no intention of backing down. "Humanity's last stand," Jake said, staring at the screen. "We're not going down without a fight." The battle was upon them. As the Zvak fleet closed in, the combined forces of Earth, the Kalori, the Solians, and now the Sarnics moved into position, prepared to show the galaxy that humanity wasn't just a footnote in history. They would fight for their future. They would fight for their survival. And as the first laser beams cut through the dark expanse of space, Jake felt a fire within him that had been absent for too long. This wasn't just a battle, it was the moment humanity proved that no matter how many times the galaxy had turned its back on them, they would always rise. The fight for Earth had begun. The end.